Hey, welcome back to the annual Ag Fair here at West Tisbury. I'm your host, Bob Tankard, and my co-host is Rudy Conrad from Cleveland, and we're here with the great Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, Senior Pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta.
Good to be here with you.
Hey, welcome. The only thing I expected when Patty Moore called me and told me you were preaching up at the Congregational Church, and she said, we had the senior pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, we'd like to have him speak. I said, that's fine, that'd be great. I'm expecting to see an elderly man come up, a little gray beard, a little sophisticated. I'm looking out in the audience, I'm seeing this guy, and I'm saying to myself, well, who is that guy? He must be an actor or somebody. He can't be a minister, at least a senior pastor yet. Anyway, you know what I mean? And when you told me, I said, you've raised to in a church, Ebenezer Baptist Church is it's very welcome to Martha's.
Thank you.
This your first time to have been here?
No, I've been here a few times, and I've been here now about a week.
All right.
I preached at First Congregational, as you said, on Sunday, and I'm having a great time trying to get some R&R.
This is the first time to the Ag Fair?
Yes, it is. First time coming to this fair.
Let me ask you, this is historical. You had 148 of these, and when you go back to the first one, the first one had to really deal with just animals and crops. That was it. There was no rides. There was no other tents like that. It was just an ag fair, agricultural fair. The farmers at the time, our island was loaded with farmers, were showing their crops and their wares and the things that they did. As the years went on, when I was a kid back in the early 60s, 60, 61, we came up here. This was a main event for island kids.
Wow.
Main event, because we didn't see rides like this.
Sure.
I saw them while I lived in New Jersey, but when you come to Martha's Vineyard, this was the main thing.
This was a big deal.
They say they broke the piggy bounds.
But the kids are excited today. As I look out, they're having a good time. It still has a 21st century appeal.
Yeah, it does. It does have its appeal. And then you have the other vendors, And then when you go into the hall over here, you'll see some of the artsy and the crafts. And then later on in the day, they'll start doing the ox pulls and the horse pulls and everything that really represents. See them oxen over the big ones? See those big ox right behind you there? If you look, they'll see the white ox. That guy's pulling. They're practicing for the ox pull, and they pull in that dirt area right behind us. They pull those weights over there. Those weights they put on over there. Those brick weights, and they pull. And excuse me. It's a magical thing. So listen, the other day, Rudy, you were there when I did an interview with
Robert Hayden.
It was not Dr. Robert Hayden, but the one I want is Ambassador Young.
My good friend and our brother, Andrew Young.
Andrew Young. I
I
knew that you had to have contact because Andrew Young and Dr. Martin Luther King were bosom buddies, almost like brothers, especially during the movement. You know what I mean? Tell us a little bit about how you got to be where you are, and how did you get to be senior pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church?
What's wrong? I don't look the part, I guess.
No.
Let me say it's a great privilege and an honor. Dr. King was assassinated in 1968.
Right.
Struggling for justice, fighting for the least of these, trying to help America to become the country that lives up to the greatness of its creed.
Right.
I was born in 1969.
Okay.
A year after Dr. King's assassination. So, in a real sense, I represent a new generation that has emerged after the civil rights movement, at least of the 50s and the 60s. Although, in a very real sense, the struggle continues. So, it's a great honor and a privilege. Ebenezer is a Baptist church, and so Baptist churches operate on a kind of local polity, and that is to say that the congregation is the governing authority.
Right.
The only way to get to be the pastor of the church, the members have to vote. It's very democratic. They elect you.
But they elect you, but as being a man that just turned 40, you know what I mean? It had to be other individual. What made them so fond of you? What did you do to give them the impression that you can handle the job?
Well, I've just always tried to be ready for whatever opportunities have come my way. I've always been very focused on social justice issues. My understanding of the gospel places the issue of the struggle for justice at the center of the gospel. And so before coming to Ebenezer, and I was elected a few years ago. I was 35 actually when they elected me. But prior to coming to Ebenezer, I was the assistant pastor at another historic church in Harlem, the Abyssinian Baptist Church, which also has a great civil rights history. An activist at the helm of that church who lived out his activism and his work as a member of Congress. Adam Clayton Powell, whose house is still here on the vineyard.
I knew Adam.
Certainly no stranger to Martha's Vineyard. So I was there for about 10 years, first as a youth pastor, and then the assistant pastor. And while there, making my way through Union Seminary, where I did all of my graduate training. And then I went to another civil rights bastion of a church, a historic church, the Douglas Memorial Community Church in Baltimore. And when Dr. King would come through Baltimore, very often Douglas was his operating base in terms of the church. And then, and prior to both of those churches, I was an intern minister at the 6th Avenue Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. That church was headed by a pastor who's now deceased. His name was John Porter. When he was a young seminarian, he was Dr. King's pulpit assistant at Dexter Avenue in Montgomery. He served under Dr. King at Dexter Avenue, and then when he went to seminary, he's in Atlanta, he served under Daddy King at Ebenezer. And so this man who had been mentored by Daddy King and Martin Luther King Jr. was also my mentor. And so I didn't set out to land in these places, but it seems that the Lord had something in mind.
You know, it seems as though when I had a chance to talk to Ambassador Young, he was telling me that, during the movement of Martin Luther King, Rudy, is when he said that of the 50 in Birmingham, of the 50 churches in Birmingham at that time, it was only roughly 14 to 15 that were actually active in the civil rights movement. A lot of them felt as though that they were either remote or they didn't want to get too involved because of the hostility that was there, and their churches would be burned down. Well, we know the church in Atlanta was bombed, so that they felt as though that their churches, if they were remote, like out of the city and out of the neighborhood, they did that not too long ago when we were talking about some of the athletes, and we know that the guy that played for the Green Bay Packers, his church was burnt down in, what was his name? The football player that played for the Packers, that was a real Christian brother and a pastor.
I don't remember.
I'm not sure. You're not speaking of Herb, were you?
Huh?
Was Herb Adderley?
Not Herb Adderley. He just passed away, in fact. He's a big tackle, played for the Packers, Eagles and the Packers. Yes. We were talking about him anyway. His church, so they had church bombings as far back recently, as far as 5-6 years ago. You know what I mean? And so therefore, he was saying basically that some of those people didn't want to cooperate in the church. Tell me now, is the church that you're at, Ebenezer Baptist Church, the legacy that it has left behind, it must have a tourist attraction of millions coming through there wanting to see.
Sure, there's not a Sunday that I don't preach not only to my congregation, but people literally from around the world who come.
It's not just a black church anymore.
It is, well, Ebenezer was never just a black church. Ebenezer has always had pastors at the helm of that church who had a broader view of humanity, even while situated in a kind of distinctive religious and cultural milieu that I guess you could certainly call the black church, but the church always had a global vision. That's why, and it really provided the foundation for the global vision and work of Martin Luther King Jr. Everybody knows Martin Luther King Jr., but fewer people know that his dad, who was affectionately called Daddy King, led a voting rights struggle in Atlanta, in the heart of the Confederacy, in 1935. People know about the voting rights law of 1965. They don't know that Daddy King led a voting rights struggle in 1935, and that he fought for the equalization of teachers' salaries. He said that people who teach what was then colored children ought to get paid the same thing as their white counterparts. And then Martin Luther King Jr.'s maternal grandfather, who was the second pastor of the church, Ed.D. Williams, was also an activist in his own right, and he fought for a decent school for colored children. And the result of that was the Booker T. Washington School, which his grandchildren later attended. So that's been the kind of history of activism and struggle in that church, always with a broader view that says that of one blood God has made all nations to dwell.
Let me tell you something. Go ahead, Rudy.
Yeah. Raphael, now that you, some of the history you put in perspective, I'm kind of interested in, I was a child of the 60s, so when Dr. King was marching there, these were, I don't want to say exciting times in the sense it was fun. They were times, but they were times of impact in my life where you felt alive. And I worry sometimes about where you see, or where people see the civil rights movement today, because it's by no means a finished movement. The fact that Barack Obama was elected president is certainly is a historic step for this country and for all peoples of color as well as for white America. But there's still a lot of unfinished work, as I think you would agree.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to know from your perspective, where do you see your ministry going today to further that civil rights movement? Because it's a term that's kind of become passé and old school, but I am old school, so I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Well, there's some civil rights that we still need to struggle for, and then there's some broader human rights, and certainly there is a way in which both of those things are connected. But there are a number of issues that we need to focus on. Certainly the election of Barack Obama, first black president of the United States of America, is clearly a watershed moment in the history of our country. And it speaks volumes about how far we've come. At the same time, there are issues that still need to be addressed. Major issues. Race still matters.
It does.
Class is still an issue. And it just plays itself out in some different places. For example, one of the sectors of our society, in my estimation, that was least impacted, and I've talked to Ambassador Young and others about this, and he would certainly agree. One of the sectors least impacted by the civil rights movement was the criminal justice system. In fact, it has gotten worse.
A lot worse.
So one of the things that I would point to is a rising prison industrial complex in the United States of America, such that you have an African American who's president, but you still have far too many African American men and women who are in prison. 1 in 3 young black men somewhere in the system. And this is a profit-driven system that certainly doesn't bode well for the country. We have 2 million people in prison in the United States of America. There are 9 million people in prison worldwide. 2 million are here. So there's something wrong,
very wrong,
with that picture. So that's one of the things that I would point to, and that's one of the issues that I've been involved with.
Doctor, you talked about it being a profitable industry.
That's right. It's money making, absolutely.
To explain that a little bit.
Well, I mean, if you go back and look at these statistics, even for example, in the 90s when crime was going down, prison construction was continually going up. So something other than crime was driving prison construction. It's the new slavery.
In other words, they were looking for, if crime was going down and prison construction was going up,
absolutely,
there was something hidden to say this structure will soon be filled by...
Absolutely. Listen, Bob, this is the prison system, the prison industrial complex is the new slavery. And we've got to address our social policy in a way that takes that on in a very, very serious way. And let me explain to you why I say that. For example, as I said, prison construction going up even when crime going down. You have farming communities in New York State, for example,
Right.
and I'm sure it's no different in this state, where agriculture, we're at the county fair, abounded, and some of those industries are in decline in certain
Right.
places. So there are places where there were farming industries where they're now literally fighting to have a prison built for, you know, economic revitalization. And you have politicians who pit these constituencies against one against another.
Mm-hmm.
There's a law in New York State that says that you should not have people in terms of their representation
Right.
in the state house
Right.
can't be based on the population of prisoners in a certain area. So if you've got all the prisoners who are coming from a neighborhood, say in Brooklyn,
Mm-hmm.
right, but they're located there because they're in the prison system. Prison system is in another
state.
upstate county. You literally have representatives who amass to themselves political power
Because of the prison population.
based on prison
Prison
population. Gerrymandering based on the incarceration of black bodies. And I could go on and on and on. Marion Wright Edelman talks as eloquently and as powerfully about this as anyone I know. She's recently put together a publication called The Pipeline from the Cradle to the Prison, the
Right.
Cradle to the Prison Pipeline, in which she argues, for example, that there is literally a straight line from the foster care system in our country to the prison system. That the statistics and the chances that a kid in foster care will go to prison are incredibly high. I think it's something like 4 or 5 times the rate of a kid not in foster care. And so we can do better than that as a country. And so the part of the terrain where the civil rights struggle is happening, in my estimation, or needs to happen increasingly, is around this issue of the prison population. And so I and others are very focused on that. You may have read the other day that the Supreme Court recently ruled in favor of a death row inmate by the name of Troy Davis.
Right.
I and others have been fighting on his behalf. He was accused in 1991 of killing a Savannah police officer.
Right.
No physical evidence links him to the crime. 7 of 9 witnesses have either changed or recanted their testimony. And still 20 years later, we're fighting just to get this man a fair hearing. And finally,
What makes
the other day,
what makes the judicial system so tough that they argue and they're so reluctant to change, even though when they see the evidence has changed, to give this man freedom or this woman freedom
Sure.
from the bondage that they're in, then they're in unjustly.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think systems of power in general are reluctant to change.
Okay.
Power concedes nothing without a struggle. Never has, never will. You've got to push
Right.
in order to encourage systems to change. Martin Luther King Jr. came up against that, and he understood from his readings of Reinhold Niebuhr and others, and just from being an African American man growing up in the South, that it's easier to get individuals to change than it is to address systems, which is why I think churches have been so reluctant to address systems of injustice. In America, we have this kind of religion that's focused on individual formations, but not enough on social transformation.
Right.
And so religious folk who are very, very serious about sustained engagement of systems tend to be on the margins. People like Martin Luther King Jr.,
Right.
who was in the church, but in a real sense on the margins of the church. Not just the church in America, but in a real sense, even though he was a black churchman, he was put out of his own denomination because he was seemed to be a kind of rabble rouser and a bit of a nuisance by the president of the National Baptist Convention.
I would say he was considered more than a bit of a nuisance.
Sure, sure.
And again, this, President Obama is talking about giving back to America and encouraging our youth to do something with their life. And this, it's hard when we see exactly related to this prison problem where, black youth are being, literally, it's from high school, if they make it through right into the prison system. Where do we find life with a purpose in America today? This, I think, has to be the question we have to address to our youth.
Sure.
What purpose? Because if you don't have a purpose when you get up in the morning, if there's not something there,
Right.
then, how do you go forward? Then the lure of drugs becomes, escapism becomes very popular.
Right.
So, again, these are the
that
questions.
represents freedom. That represents success.
Sure.
That represents a way out. Even though to us it's all negative and harmful, to them it's an avenue of escape.
Sure.
If they don't see a clear vision down the road.
It's on all our plates. We're all responsible for ourselves. We all need to step forward one more and make change. But my concern is that as I face later years now, my good years now, my final years, although there's going to be many of them.
You look good too. You're going to be around for a
I'm
while.
going to be around for a while, and I'm not laying it off. But what I do mean to say, though, is I do have a lot of concern for our youth. Because if we don't have them, if we don't give them the tools with which to go in a direction that they can continue the change. I mean, things like you're doing now, and you can't forget, the struggle wasn't just back then.
Sure.
And it didn't die when Martin Luther King died. It didn't die when Malcolm X died. It didn't die when any of our leaders
and
died.
it starts with the youth, as you point out. Related to the prison industrial complex, because all these things are connected, is a public education system that's broken.
Right.
So that in cities across the country, you've got as many as 70% of black boys dropping out of high school.
Yeah, and
and the violence, the hopelessness, the despair. So we've got to speak to the heart and spirit of our children.
Right.
But at the same time, while we emphasize personal responsibility and personal improvement, the fact of the matter is children, when they're born in the world, are something of a tabula rasa. They're a blank tablet.
Right.
And we write on that tablet, certainly for those formative years. So these children are going through systems that adults design. So every time adults ask me, what's wrong with children today? My response is the children are fine. It's the adults that are
Amen.
the problem.
Absolutely right. Listen, I know that you're running, and I enjoyed your opportunity. Patty Moore and I didn't know if this could happen, but I said if you could come to the fair, we could make it happen.
Thank you.
I wish you success
Very
in
good.
the next 40 years.
Thank you.
Okay, and I know that Dr. Martin Luther King, Daddy King, and all the people that made the civil rights movement what it is and what it's going to be, and your future in the civil rights movement will be successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good to be here.
Thank you, Dr.
And listen, don't go away. We're going to be right back here at the Ag Fair in West Tisbury.